And to bring it back into the conversation of today, I mean, this is exactly why when I read, I got it here because I loved it so much. And I've got my little marks on it. When I read your book, The Power of Employee Wellbeing, it hit me because the complexity of the world right now, what we're seeing at the geopolitical level, what we're seeing in terms of, even something like return to office, all of that is located in the individual, right? We are all individuals. We are all humans walking through life. And your book was one of the first things that I saw that really just came out and just said, please treat humans like please treat your employees like humans. And I just thought, oh my gosh, yes, here we go. And so I wanted to start there because you call The Power of Employee Wellbeing a primer. It was one of the first things I noticed. It's not a huge book. It's not a long book. I think I read it in maybe 2 nights, if not 1 night. And this is your second book after Lead from the Heart. Why did you want to create this book right now? What's important about this moment?
When COVID hit, I used to go to the gym every morning. And when the gyms closed, I just impulsively woke up the next day and said, I'm just going to go walk on the beach. So I walked on the beach every morning. Found out it was like the most wonderful thing. Never go back to a gym at 5 o'clock in the morning if you don't have to. So, but one day I'm coming off the beach and all of a sudden this word primer hits me. And I was like, am I supposed to pay attention to this? So I asked a friend of mine who's sort of like, spiritually in the know. And I go, am I supposed to take advantage of this? Am I supposed to do something with this? And she goes, yep, that's your gift from the universe. And Rick Rubin in his book about creativity basically says that that's the way it works. You download this information, and if you don't take action on it, it's going to be given to somebody else, and not to punish you, but because the timing is right. So that's the answer to your question. 2 things happened. One was that. The other one was that I've been actively supporting employee well-being with articles, actually working with Gallup, and in Lead from the Heart in the second edition, they actually gave me state-of-the-art research to include. So I was very close to them. But I wrote an article in 2012 or 13 where I said that, Gallup gave me permission to be the person to say that engagement in America is at a crisis level. Only 30% of Americans are engaged. And I'm like, oh my God, that's horrible. And what would happen if we could change that? And when people are really fully engaged, what would happen to organizations? I get this email from Gallup and I open it up and it says engagement falls to 11-year low. This was like a year and a half ago. And I'm thinking, well, how in the world is that possible after all the focus that we've put on this? So I open it up and the numbers are the same as they were when I wrote this article all those years ago. And I instantaneously said, we've never taken this seriously. We got to stop talking about it. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Yeah, everybody's talking about it. Nobody's doing anything about it. Because clearly, if we were, it would have gone up a couple points, 10 points, something, but it's still sitting at 30%, which just says Wall Street never cared about it. CEOs never cared about it. No one was ever held accountable for it. And so it ends up just annoying the people because they get surveyed and they go, I'm working for a really toxic manager and I'm going to leave if you don't fix it. And then 90 days later, 6 months later, tell us about the conditions of your workplace and what suggestions you have. I'm still working for the same person. Nothing's ever been done. It was the combination of primer and that idea. And then one more piece of evidence that came out like weeks later. That's the research that you read from Oxford that basically showed that employee well-being has a direct correlation to all good things. Elevated productivity, elevated retention, elevated loyalty, elevated productivity or profitability. So when I saw that, that's just confirmation of everything that I've been talking about for the last 15 years. So it was like, I'm supposed to write this book. I've got to make the point that engagement is time to move on. And then I need to flesh out what are the practices of driving employee well-being. So
tell me, because I read your book, I read a lot of, this is a topic that's very interesting to me. So I read your book. It made me think of another book that I'd read by Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford called Dying for a Paycheck. Very similar research and pulling on these threads and showing, the ROI of this. And I also read Brian Elliott. I read a lot of people who are saying very similar things. And three of you have something in common. You all, with all due respect, you look like a CEO. You look like a person that a CEO would have in his C-suite and would listen to as a trusted advisor. So are CEOs listening to this as you're showing them this evidence?
Some are and some aren't. So, it's interesting because when I came out with a book called Lead from the Heart, but I thought it would be an advantage that AI was a man, right? So it's like, I didn't expect that. Sorry, but we much more likely attribute that kind of a title to a woman, right? But on top of that, I manage stockbrokers, I manage investment advisors. And so this is sort of a dog eat dog world where people are on commissions. They don't get paid unless they sell. So it's throw meat at them. That's the mentality. And that's what we think is the mentality. And so I thought I had an advantage. But we just have a deeply entrenched belief system that people will not work hard unless you force them to. And so when you say care about your people, are you insane? Have you ever worked in a workplace? So I'm an outlier nut job is the way that I think people see it. So I started writing for Fast Company. I just had my 50th and 51st article come out. I did that on purpose. I thought it would be, I'm just going to drip on people so that they can go, hey, he's not insane. Like that makes sense. You start to add them up over time. And I did the podcast, same reason, 8 years ago. So actually people could hear me and go, he's not insane. So I'm getting more invitations from CEOs to come speak and consult even that I've had. There's been more in the last 2 years than there were in I'm having to say no to some because something is happening. And I think we started talking about this before you were recording, that it's bottom up. They're realizing that people are really unhappy. They're getting the feedback for whatever ways that they're tapping into people's feedback. And people, you've got it here. Burnout is at a record high. People are incredibly stressed. And the other part of this is that I know we'll get to this, but the lack of connection that people have in their real lives, there's just not enough connection with people. We know that it's declined by almost 25% in the last 10 years. We're not meant to be that way. We're not meant to be lonely and disconnected from people and not having enough interactions with people. We are destabilized before we even show up to work is, I think, one of the components of this. The answer is some CEOs are getting on board with this. I just spoke to one of the largest law firms in the country, their partners, and they were all over it. It was just Saturday. And I left there just like, Jiminy Cricket. I was so excited because they were on board. But I also I won't call it out, but I spoke to another firm that's in an industry that you wouldn't even think would have me in. But there was sort of like, not so sure kind of a thing afterwards. So it's happening. It's just continuing to happen slowly.
Yeah, that notion of belonging, which I was just flipping through kind of the chapters that I'd marked when I read the book, and I was highlighting all over that. And it's so interesting. I was reading a book yesterday on the neuroscience of organizational change, and it was talking about how just by the sheer fact that we are mammals and the fact that we require so much care to develop as humans, we have connection baked in from the very beginning into how our brains work. That this connection, this desire to seek out connection is there from the beginning. And there was this stat that just absolutely blew my mind, this piece of research where it talked about if you are standing at the bottom of a hill and you're looking at the incline of the hill and you're estimating the incline of the hill, if you have someone next to you and you estimate that incline, you think you can accomplish it more. Like it looks less. And if you even think about walking up that hill with someone else, even thinking about it, you estimate it to be easier. And I just thought that was so incredible and just such a great like underscoring of what you point to in your book about belonging. And you make this case that belonging is really overlooked but like important driver of well-being. How, when there's so much right now that is kind of chipping away at belonging, whether that's, DEI programs being dismantled or the threat of like the forever layoff, how can people find belonging right now in organizations?
There are other things going on too, which is, when COVID hit, we got comfortable being by ourselves because we had to be, right? We were can't go out, can't go be with anyone, do anything social. And so we got used to having food delivered. We got used to having streaming, we're watching Netflix, not dressing up, and we're lazy and narcissistic as human beings. And so the idea of giving that up and getting in the car and going to see somebody is just, it feels a little bit oppressive after we had all that time, right? We're coming at it at a deficiency already. And then your point about most leaders don't even understand the importance of belonging. So it's just like, hey, Ellen, I need you to do this. Bill, I need you to do this. Tom, I need you to do this. Go do this. Instead of saying, hey, I'd like for the three of you to work together on this together, because it would give you something that you need as a human being in order to thrive. We just simply don't think about that. You create an environment where some people feel a lack of fairness, and you're never going to have any belonging. So belonging is actually a pretty sophisticated thing. Why it's important is because the Oxford researchers, they asked millions of people, of all the things that mean something to you in terms of your well-being, what do you point to as being the most important? And they said it's belonging. We need to pay attention to this, because if you want a thriving team, you better knock off the one that's the most important aspect of it. We hire people into the organization, and then we somehow decide to marginalize some over others, right? So fairness is a big component of this. Is everybody being treated the same way? But I think it's also irrespective of whether there's a DEI program or not, whether people feel that they can be who they are, all dimensions. It's just understanding that what people want is the two drivers of belonging are knowing that you can be who you are and that you have psychological and emotional safety, so you can speak your mind, you can be who you are, you can carry yourself as who you are, and that's respected not just by your boss, which is critically important, but by the people you work with. And it's so fascinating to me that Daniel Coyle wrote this fantastic book about what drives the most successful teams. And if you look in sports, the teams that thrive, they don't have a number one star. Even if they have people that are like the most wonderful player on a team, they orient themselves as a team. They do things as a team. They look out for each other as a team. The one person doesn't take the winning shot all the time. They're looking to support each other. So the big component to me from a business leadership standpoint is fostering an environment where people have each other's backs. If you realize that in sports it works like that, it's like, why would we diminish that or minimize it in workplaces? You hired these people, so why not honor their talents and bring them all together? And by also say that if you're going to work on this team, that we're going to work together, that this is a collaborative, cohesive team where we have each other's backs, as opposed to you arguing that I'm the best player on the team here or best employee on the team and you want special considerations. That's not what moves the needle in terms of high performance. That's not what any of us want. We all want to know that we're contributing.
But when we see this in the context of what we saw this week with Coinbase, where like Coinbase is laying off
10%.
A significant portion of its employee population, and talking about, you will have teams of one, and it'll be a team of one with, a bunch of different AI agents. Have you had any conversations about what belonging looks like in that era, and how you achieve belonging in that kind of environment?
I mean, we were talking earlier, before we started recording here, about the idea that we have to push, we have to take things too far before we realize we've gone too far and we need to reverse. That's going to be one of them. You're not going to have belonging if you're working with agentic AI. And right now, I guarantee you there are people out there that are thinking, I can lay off the leadership team, bring in agentic AI and tell them, you tell these managers what to do, or you tell these employees what to do. So they'll actually end up reporting to AI. And not only is that dystopian and I think patently wrong, but somebody's going to try it. But how in the world are you ever going to feel a sense of connection if you're talking to technology as opposed to another human being? So interestingly, if you were to do that, the people that are doing that are going to if I have an inclination to be more self, independent kind of a thing, I don't need connection. The minute you put somebody working for AI, they're going to go, I need people. Where are the people? It's like we've gone,
Yeah.
but I don't see that working out. But it's being experimented in the tech firms. And part of me thinks that it's sort of, it's almost a sales pitch. It's almost as if, look at us, we're letting 10% of our people go. And if you use our technology, you can let your 10% people go. And you don't need to have managers that are high paid. You can just use, none of this has been proven. None of this has been proven, right? And so companies that just take the leap because they can show the bottom line has been affected by eliminating, people at a higher salary, and you've lowered the cost structure of your organization, and that means more profits for shareholders. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and there's going to be consequences of that. So I would say to anybody that's even thinking about doing that, you might slow it down a little bit and test it, because I don't see it working well at all.
Well, and let's dig into some of those. Again, another off the cuff question, but let's dig into some of that. So, if we were to start a study today, right, looking at maybe the organizations that say, okay, we're going to do the team of one, we're going to do those, and this is going to how we're going to run our business, and then we were to look at an organization that adopted some of what you advocate for in your book around. You touched on this earlier, but what are some of the true returns that can come from investing in well-being?
You mean literally investing in well-being?
Like let's get into that ROI and like why CEOs may be a little dunderheaded.
One thing that I'll point out is that not only are human beings hardwired to thrive on, connection and belonging, interacting with other people, but the most painful thing we can do to people, and which we do to people when we want to punish them, is isolate them. So, if even in prisons, the worst of the worst are sent into cells by themselves where they don't see anybody. That's like the worst thing we can do to somebody, because we absolutely need that. So these companies that think that somebody is going to do well at working with AI as opposed to other people, it's delusional. It's just because it's so anti-human that people will just explode. Their mental health will explode, and they'll just end up leaving, or they'll go insane. I mean, I know that sounds exaggerated, but it's not a setup that's going to work well for humans. It just simply isn't. But the best example of this is an organization called Irrational Capital. Irrational Capital was founded by two people. One of them was Dan Ariely, who's written like 3 New York Times best-selling books. He's a behavioral economist. And I think what they started to do was to see, they started off as a research firm. And what they did was they started to go into companies, corporations, and they said, we're interested in evaluating the well-being of organizations, and we're willing to come into your organization and basically survey your people without your involvement, right? So we're just going to do it. We'll extract the information and we'll share the data with you in terms of where you stack and how well you're doing. And people are like, sure, go do it. Well, then what they did was they looked at the top 20% and they compared the stock performance of those organizations. And over an 11-year period, it was massively higher. So they literally created an exchange traded fund, which is like a mutual fund. It's cleverly called HAPI, HAPI. And in the first 3 years, it's been up 25%. So it's beat the market significantly. But I had the other co-founder on my podcast, and he said, the minute we started to announce this and started sharing our results, we had CEOs of companies saying, hey, could you put our company stock into your ETF? And they're like, yeah, well, we're totally willing to do that as long as you get into the top 20%. Yeah. And so all of a sudden now, I think you got Wall Street paying attention to this, because if it continues to outperform, instead of having Wall Street analysts or, activist shareholders, which makes CEOs' lives miserable, saying to them, hey, we need you to, drive up earnings here for the next quarter here, or you're going to get fired. They're going to say, you need to elevate the well-being of your people because we think that drives better performance. So I think, so the financial aspect of this is pretty irrefutable at this point. Right. Companies that, and it's really interesting, going back to sports. If you think about like the most highly successful athletes, are they eating hot dogs and hamburgers all night long, and they getting drunk at night, they're not getting enough sleep, and do we really think that you're going to get optimal performance out of people when their well-being isn't being supported? They have, like these professional athletes, they have their own hypnotist, they have their own nutritionist, they have their own trainer, they have their own chef, and they're traveling with them wherever they go. Why? Because that's what's going to support their success. So this idea shouldn't be so, well, I'm not so sure that well-being is going to drive
Right.
optimal performance. It's like it stands up on its own. We shouldn't be having this conversation like, here's another reason. It should just be
Right.
obvious.
Get the sense that you are an optimist about a lot of this, and you're nodding. And this book is targeted towards leaders. It's targeted towards managers. You are an incredibly accessible human, and I'm wondering if part of that optimism, are you hearing from people who like have taken this and been able, at least maybe not at the organizational level, but at the team level, been able to introduce some of these approaches to success?
Well, I gave you the example of this law firm. So being invited to the senior partner meeting for one of the largest law firms in the country this past weekend was euphoric for me. I mean, the CEO, the managing partner, got up there and he goes, "We could not have picked the best person for what we're trying to do in this firm." And I'm like, okay, this is where my optimism comes from, because I have had to pay a dear price for what I'm talking about, because we just dismiss it instinctively without really taking a look at it, because it seems so foreign to us. It seems like, no, we have to extract what we can out of people and deal with them transactionally and let them go when we need to, and just treat people like commodities, fungible commodities. And I think the world is beginning to realize that what's happened is that people, employees themselves, simply don't want this anymore. They don't want that
Mhm.
relationship. And so if you're going to treat me transactionally, I'll treat you transactionally. And that doesn't feel good either. Nobody really wants that. That's not to say you're going to have a lifetime job. That's not to say that. It's just for when I'm with you, treat me fairly, treat me respectfully, treat me with kindness and, regard and advocacy and agency, and help me fulfill my needs so that I can do my best work. And if that lasts for 10, 15, 20 years, great. If it lasts for two
Yeah.
years, you're still getting the best out of it. I think that's a really good argument, but I think that it's happening not because we're noble, sadly, because it's the right thing to do, but because companies are losing good people. And when they ask them why, it's because this is a shitty place to work. And that's the answer.
Yeah, I think about that a lot with coming back to engagement. When we talk about, so much of the people that are in my audience for my Substack and, are my colleagues are in either internal communications or in human resources. And oftentimes we get left kind of like being responsible for engagement. And I personally believe at this moment, the kindest thing I can say to some of my colleagues is to say, y'all, this is just a matter of investment. Like employees are reading the room. They're kind of seeing the investment that their employers are making in terms of, oh, we're going to pull back, parental leave, or we're going to pull back this benefit, or we're going to do this thing. And they're just calibrating it's rational investor behavior. They're calibrating their investment right back. And they're just saying, okay, you're going to get the bare minimum for me, right? Like that's a little bit of how I feel about this moment.
This is human nature. The idea that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So you take something away from me, you should be expecting me to take something away from you. That's human
Mhm.
nature. So you take away a benefit that I particularly enjoy, and if the company is starving all of a sudden, we've lost clients, we're not making as much money, and they come out and they go, "We really regret this, but in order to keep things going well, we need to cut this. We're not letting you go. I'm going to work hard because I understand the rationale." And I'm like, grateful. I'm willing to give up that benefit in order to stay here. But when you see Oracle lay off 30,000 people in an email for people that have been there for 20 years, which is exactly what they did, and then report record earnings, the best earnings in a decade, the duplicity of that is, I mean, I don't know how Oracle will ever recover from that in terms of getting people to say, "Oh, it's dinner time, but my boss wants me to, to look at this report. I'm going to have
Right.
dinner. I'll look at it later. Kind of, that just has to happen. And as soon as people can get out of that company, they're going to. Like they're going to bleed for a really long time. And this is what people don't understand: is that people shut down when they feel that they don't matter. And I use that word. There are probably 6 or 7 books that have come out in the last month about mattering. And I find that fascinating. It's because people don't feel they matter. Clearly, you don't write a book about people needing to matter if people feel that they do. So
Yeah.
we're this idea that we can just treat people transactionally and say to somebody, "Hey, leave your key and your badge and your computer on the desk, but today's your last job after 20 years." And the 20-year employee helped build the company into what it is. I mean, how do you think that that's going to work out well? I just don't seriously think that can possibly work out well. It looks great on paper, and I'm sure Oracle stock went up, but the ability to attract talented people, why would you ever go to work for a company like that where in the first day that if it comes down to us versus them, it's going to be them. They're going to be making the choice to get rid of us, and because that's how they've shown themselves. So
Yeah.
decisions, the leadership matters. And you know what? If they wanted to lay off all those people, they could have done job freezes. They could have said, "Hey, we want
Yeah.
to shrink our organization by this much, and we're willing to pay people, 2 years
Yeah.
salary in order to let you go," so that you do it in a way where people are like, "God bless you. Good luck to you, Oracle. I'm
Yeah.
leaving here. I was ready to go anyway," or "I'm willing to go try something new because of this. I want to stay home with my baby. Now you've given me the freedom." They just did this, just dynamite the whole thing like in cartoons. I don't see this working out for them. But I think other companies are going to try the same thing because they think they got away with it.
I'm going to ask a hard question. Um,
These have all
and
been
I'm
easy
going to
so far.
I'm going to make it a little bit more explicit, I think, than the question I shared with you ahead of the interview. So you posted something on LinkedIn, and I picked it up and I ran with it, and it was around the CEO who had called your approach and what you advocate for woo woo. And if we're looking at, decades upon decades of evidence here that like these approaches, these centering well-being can drive profits, that at some point we have to look at this conflation of well-being with emotion, with kind of a softer or a more feminine approach as upholding patriarchy, right? And I just wanted to ask you, like, do you think that this is something that we can reasonably see a shift in when there simply isn't more balance in the C-suite in terms of
So
gender?
I don't know that I've ever used the language patriarchy, but I understand exactly where you're coming from. What I have been saying for 15 years now is that human beings have needs, and the needs that they have are ones that are not only need to be supported for people to thrive, but when people thrive, they perform optimally. I've been saying this for 15 years, long before I wrote the well-being book.
Yeah.
Lead from the Heart is all about that. And the idea is that making people feel safe, making them feel supported, giving them opportunities to grow, opportunities to feel appreciated, to feel connected with people they're working for. These are themes that I've been talking about for a really long time. And what I've expressed is these are human needs. These aren't male or female. However, if you stack up female leaders to male leaders, there's evidence that, interestingly, not only that women tend to be more patient, more empathetic, more caring, more concerned about how people are feeling. Those tend to be, people will describe those as more feminine traits. However, they're human traits in the sense that this is what people need, right? So
Yeah.
what I'm arguing is that, by the way, there's evidence that shows that women are better leaders, more effective, like the results are better. Some people will say that can't be, but the evidence is pretty clear. So I look at that and I go, well, what's the difference? They're still driving for performance, so they wouldn't be best leaders, right? So they're getting the same performance. Well, what's different? It's all those things that I just mentioned. So what I'm arguing is that that there's a mind that's telling us we need to be, exploitive of people, and that we need to be thinking about how we're going to get our numbers and work people hard. And then there's the heart that says, we need to be caring about people, and we need to be supportive of people, because that's the way to make sure you don't kill the goose with the golden egg, right? It's like
Hmm.
you want to make sure that you can sustain people. That's not such a hard argument to make, right? So I don't find this a difficult question. What I'm really saying is balance out your two forms of intelligence: drive for performance and be caring. So if you were to go
Right.
up to people and say, hey, you used to work for Mark Crowley, what's one word that you would use to describe him? You would think, I mean, the new book just came out. It's not even 6 months old. Leaf and the Heart came out 15 years ago in the first edition. So you would think they're going to say heart-led leader, whatever, caring. And I've done this. I go, hey, if you had to describe me, what would you say? You're the most demanding leader I've ever had. So I had, and it kind of surprised me, but it was like, yes, it's both. And if I asked them, and I never have, but if I said, give me one more word, they go, well, you love us, like you care about us, you support us, right? And that's what I'm saying. You need to do both. So this is just two dimensions of humanity, but we have said we don't want the heart in leadership. We don't think we need to care about people. If we do, they're going to get soft in the middle. They're going to take advantage of you. You're not going to hit the numbers. And that's our belief system. And I'm saying not only is that wrong, but it's just the opposite. The more you
Right.
care about people, the more likely they are to reciprocate and to give you more than you can ever imagine. And that was my direct experience in my 25-year career. And now the science backs it up. I didn't go creating this based on science. I looked for science to validate what I already
Yes.
knew to be true. Oh, CEOs. The thing is that the ones who are long in the tooth, like if you see CEOs on a conveyor belt and this is their career, they're going to start to come off. And the ones that are coming up, I mean, I don't know how you could possibly refute this. I don't know why any organization would hire a CEO today who continues to think that we need to, basically, squeeze people as much as possible and make this a win-lose proposition. I don't see it happening. And interestingly, there's an organization, Ernst Young, which is one of the top consulting firms in America, and they have a chief employee well-being officer. And when I talked to him, I was deliberately asking questions that like I think are sophisticated. Like if you know even half of what I'm talking about here, I'm going to be impressed. And he kept one-upping me. Yeah, we're doing that and we're doing this. And I'm like, okay. So and these are math people, these are finance people, these are accountants, largely. And so if those people are on board with this, and they see it as a journey. They don't think that they're going to do this overnight, but they're basically saying that in order for us to succeed here and to attract the level of people that we want to go out and say, we got the MBA from Harvard and we got the MBA from Wharton. We don't want Jerry Lewis Junior College on the resumes, right? We want to be able to go out to our we'll go out to our clients and say, you're working with the most sophisticated, talented, and experienced people. Well, those are the people that quit first if they don't
Yeah.
get their well-being met. So when I see that, goes back to your question, am I optimistic and encouraged? Yeah, because there was no such thing as a chief employee well-being officer anywhere just like a couple of years ago. And so this is, if you're competing against an Ernst Young, and you see the talent that they're able to attract and retain and the productivity that they're going to get, you're either going to have to get on board and do the same thing in order to compete, or you're going to get slaughtered. And so, I'm going to have my popcorn ready.
Well, thank you, Mark, for your time, and you've left me more optimistic, I think, than I was
Oh,
entering into
good.
this conversation.
Well,
So,
your questions were wonderful, and your work is wonderful, by the way. What you sent me
thank you,
is really, really well done. So I learned from you. So thank you.
thank you. I appreciate it.